Because you don't know. I don't know. There's no way to understand heart motives. You remember what Paul said? Paul said, it's a small matter if somebody judges me. He said, I don't even know what makes me tick. He said, the only one who knows what makes me tick is God himself, and we'll wait until the judgment and find out what he has to say. So be very careful about analyzing your mate and playing the part of the psychologist. This is why you said that. This is why you always are doing that. No. Or how about the historian? The historian. You know, these correct the details of every story. The reason I'm laughing is I went out not too long ago, well, I guess it's been a while back, with a couple, and the man was trying to tell a story. And every time he would begin to try to tell the story, his wife would correct him. He said, well, it was last Wednesday. She said, no, it wasn't Wednesday. It was Tuesday, because on Wednesday we go to church. He said, okay. Well, I got in my truck. No, you didn't get in your truck. You took the car that day. And my goodness, this story took 3 hours to finish because she continued to correct every little detail. I want to say, lady, let him talk. But you ever met somebody like that? The one that keeps records? It's kind of like the fellow that, told a guy down at work, he said, man, when we get in an argument, my wife gets historical. He said, no, you mean hysterical? He said, no, historical, because she brings up everything that has always happened in the past. Don't do that. Don't do that. Stick to the issue. When you have an argument, stay with what is at hand. Sometimes in an argument, one realizes, well, I'm losing this argument, so I better bring in some new information. And they go back to another position and bring that up, and it causes great harm in the marriage. Also, the position of dictator. These use force in marriage. It may be verbal force. They will say something like this, well, I will not allow that in my house. I demand that you do thus and so. And beware of issuing ultimatums. If you do that one more time, it's over. Or maybe veiled threats. You try that again, and you just see what happens. A dictator. Somebody said, keep words sweet and warm, because you may have to eat them. The dictator changes marriage from I do to you'd better. That's a sad case. That's a sad case. Let me give you some clubs that the dictator may use. Abuse. Some use physical abuse. And sir, I'll say this morning publicly, if you're one who strikes your wife, you're about as low a human being as on the face of this earth. But times have changed. There are now women who beat their husbands. I've actually, in my ministry, I've had 2 or 3 cases of that where the husband would not fight back. I know very well a young man that grew up with me. He went into the ministry, and he married a young lady. And I thought from the very beginning, my, this is the wrong person for you, but he married the lady. And she had a violent temper. The marriage ended some many years later, and some many children later. And he confessed to me not too long ago that they'd gotten in arguments. And he said one time she held a pistol to his head. He said, Bill, I thought that she was going to kill me that day. He told me that she at times would pull knives on him, that he had been cut and stabbed. He would keep all this secret. He was pastoring during this time. Said on another occasion, when she would get angry with him, she would go and break things that he had. He had served overseas as a missionary, and he had brought back some things from overseas that he treasured, and she would break them. They, just a horrible, acidic, very dysfunctional type of relationship. Abuse. You should never lay your hands on your spouse in anger. Never, never, never. I hope that's clear, because I've talked with some people that think that's normal. They think, well, we get in an argument and we duke it out. Folks, that is very abnormal. And that is so very, very, you're laughing. There's some people, that's the normal thing, the way to do things. That is so far from God's standard. Abuse, but also affection. Affection. Some withhold affection. It used to be that they would say that the man would withhold money and the woman would withhold love. You know, the Bible addresses situations like that. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, beginning in verse 3, Paul writes this, and he says, "Let the husband render to his wife the affection due her. Likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another except with consent for a time," that is mutual consent, "that you may give yourself to fasting and prayer to come together again, so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." Now, don't ever use affection as a bartering tool. Well, you made me mad, so I'm not going to have anything to do with you. How foolish is that? And I will say that a marriage without affection, without physical affection, is a very fragile marriage. It's a very fragile home. Also the critic, not just the dictator, but the critic. Don't condemn and criticize or compare your partner. You know, why can't you be like so-and-so? How foolish is that? You know, the old saying, why can't you cook biscuits like my mother? And reply back, why don't you bring home dough like my daddy? You know, that old byline. Never criticize your partner over something that is beyond their control. Their looks, their parents. You know, never criticize them. And don't ever criticize in front of others. Don't do that. Oh, how harmful that is to your spouse when you criticize them in front of a group. Don't do that. Also, lastly, the preacher. The preacher. One will assume a holier-than-thou attitude and lecture the other one and use the Bible as a club. I've seen so many guys who want to be the big boss, and they'll take their Bible and basically beat their wife. "You're to submit to me, woman!" You know, don't understand the principle of submission in the Word of God. And how horrible that is. How horrible that is. I'm not saying you shouldn't use the Word of God, just don't use it as a bat or as a battering ram. Tune in. Tone down. But also sweeten up. Sweeten up. Be slow to wrath. Resolve your hurts. Don't dissolve your home. Let me give you 3 don'ts and 3 do's. First of all, 3 don'ts if you're having conflict. Don't practice avoidance. Maybe you say to your wife or you say to your husband, "Hey, is anything wrong?" "No. No." Well, it's obvious something's wrong. Don't practice avoidance. You may repress your issues, but your stomach and your blood pressure will keep score. Care enough to confront. I know that's hard. But lovingly confront. Don't always suppress those things, because it will eventually show up. It will eventually show up. Some mates fear anger in the marriage. Oh, we were never to be angry with one another. That's not true. Anger and arguments are inevitable, but it's a matter of how those issues are solved. And solve those issues. Don't sweep them under the carpet, because eventually they're going to all come out. So don't practice avoidance. Number 2, don't practice appeasement. Don't practice appeasement. Some just always give in. Sometimes we appease and we call it compromise. It's kind of like the couple that had a disagreement on where to go on vacation. Said, well, my wife wanted to go to the mountains and I wanted to go to the seashore, so we compromised and we went to the mountains. Well, folks, that's not a compromise. That's not a compromise. Maybe one time one will get violent and the other one will get silent. I remember when I was in college, I was dating a young lady, and she was very much an appeaser. And I always thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have somebody to agree with everything I said? Doesn't that seem wonderful? But I found out real soon I didn't like that. And so, knowing me, I would try to do things that were outlandish or say things that were outlandish just to see if she would agree with them. And she did. And I thought, this is not the type of relationship I need to be in, is with somebody that agrees with everything I say. Now I have a wife that doesn't agree with anything I say.